going to continue with our arm build now, attaching the rear brace. The rear brace is the piece that comes up here and protects the back of the arm, sometimes right the way around to the bicep. Typically on late 14th century Italian arms, they tend to be quite short, ending somewhere just above the cutter wing here, which is certainly the case in this one. So we're going to take a look at what we need to do to get the rear brace made and get it attached, and we're going to probably put in a small triangular rib across the top here, unlike the decorative one that we've got there, just to make it a bit stronger. So we can take a look at how we do those as well. So the first thing we've got to take a look at is the lane that the rear brace is going to attach to. In this one here, I've not made any changes yet. It's still very stiff, catching on here. This isn't formed very well, and I want to drop in the sliding rivets into these pieces to give us a bit more movement. So we'll get into that. On this one, it's just about there, and you can see the world of difference in the movement when compared to that one. Good enough, but we just want to tidy it up and make it a bit slicker. So I've taken the lame out of the cutter. So this is the one that the rear brace will sit in here, and I've marked where the cutter at the minute closes to on there, so I can check that I get a better movement out of it shortly. What we've got here are just a pair of holes, about 4mm, 532, that sort of size. What we're going to do is extend these holes up a bit this way, and what this will do is it will enable things to move more smoothly, shut better, and also give a bit of a lateral movement to the elbow as well for the wearer. So I'm going to drill a hole above each one and then file it through and connect it. So what I've done here is I've just punched a hole a bit further up. Now you can get slot punches. They make this a bit quicker, but I don't like them because they tend to lure you into a sense of security that if you cut your slot, everything will work. But if you look at originals, you'll see very often the slots will either trail inwards slightly towards the joint or travel in all sorts of directions, because the armourer at the time wanted it to do a specific thing, or he wasn't happy with the movement. And I find those slot punches tend to lead you into a sense of security that, oh, it's all okay because it's got a nice cut to it. But you know, whatever folk like to do, I just prefer to make a couple of holes and then take them out with the files to the shape and size I want. So now I'm going to open it up with this smaller needle file here, and then I'll get in there with this one to finish it off and round it off a bit nicer. On originals you can see sometimes they even just cut these out with chisels. They're very square, very regular shapes, obviously a lot quicker than monkeying about with files, but it's where I'm at the moment, so that's what I'm going to do. Now remember, when you're filing these out, that's the way this is opening, so that will go hard against the closure at the back of the cutter here. So I don't want to take my filing further down this way into there, otherwise it will increase the range of the lame and you'll end up breaking out. So be careful not to file the bottom of the mark already, otherwise you'll end up breaking the lame out of the cutter all the time. So when you're filing, just be aware of that and be careful. Something else I like to do with my files, if I can catch the light here, you should be able to see it, there we go, is to snap the tip, just the very tip off of them, so that it's not like a needle. I don't need them to be that precise right down to that tiny space there, but what it stops you doing is when you come out of the material you stab yourself in the hand. It's not quite as brutal as it can be. We've all got little pock marks and holes around our hand where we've come out with these, and I just learned earlier on, just snap that off and jobs are good. So there we go, there's a little slide in there. Just check he moves in there well enough. Now sometimes I find with the way I build my armour, what I do is I find I need to come in just a little bit here, a bit more on this side than on that side, and the rivets work really well. Some people just go straight up and it works well, others in the other direction. I think it's just down to the way that you build your armour and so on, but it doesn't make any difference, the finished piece, as long as it's moving well. So I'll repeat that on this side and then we'll give it a test. So we've dropped in the lane back in with the slide that we've just put in there, and you can see already how much of a difference it makes. There's where it was closing, and now the closure goes to there. It's absolutely bob on where we want it to go, and it still doesn't open past itself, still unable to. I just want to make sure that's nice movement there, and then I'll trim these bits off here next. That will slide backwards and forwards quite nicely with just the marrying up a little tamp at some point just around the edge, just to get it going nicely and that much smoother. But that's what the slide will do for you, and it will give you that, which is very difficult to see on the single lane, that movement there, that lateral movement, so important to making the armour feel comfortable. So we are with the lane back in place. Straighten these off. So I want to push that outer edge there just down a touch on that lane. You can see there, it's just, it won't change the movement, but it just gives the guy a bit more movement in there. So you can see how we've got a nice, popping out there, tighten that up. We've got a nice loose movement, and everything's doing what it ought to be doing. So now we'll crack on with the rear brace. So our lane's cut and fitting quite nicely there. Nice solid movement on. We've tidied him up a bit on the inside, scalloping him round. Work on there a little bit more just there, but he's more or less there now. Good enough certainly to be moving on to this next part. Now the rear brace on these Italian arms only really comes up just past the couter wing and its size. They had other shoulder defences and things going on there. English ones tend to go up and meet fully with a spolder, and you need to get everything accurate for that. But as this is coming up, as long as it follows the same shape that we've taken here for the person's measurements, will be good. Now I notice on the one from the picture from the museum, the size of the couter wing, which is why I've drawn it in there as to what it's going to be, is about as well the same size as the protrusion of the rear brace up. So what I've done is I've taken that there, given myself a little bit extra, because I'm probably going to turn this edge into a triangle. And also we want to be able to go into the lane here. So I've got my measurement across the lane. It'll fight me every way now because we're on camera, but there you go. And we drop that in there and we see how it goes. I want it just past there, which is good. And up there, so I can work out what size I need it to be so I can trim it back. Now you'll notice at the minute as well, it's not really going straight, it's a little bit forward, but we can change all of that with a couple of bits done on this lane here and where we put the rivets into the rear brace. So we'll get this cut out of some metal and we'll move on from there. Now typically what I've done is I've just pressed on with the job, forgetting that I'm filming, and I've gone a bit further than I wanted to do. So I'll do a quick recap on this piece. We've started to make the basic shape from the rear brace. What I'm using here is a bit of 18 gauge mild steel, so I'm working it cold and I can deform it a little bit with my hands. The chap who's wearing this will be using it for LARPing and light reenactments. He just doesn't want anything too heavy, certainly doesn't need to protect himself from HMB, that sort of thing. So a nice bit of 18 gauge, because when the lame's on the bottom it's going to go about there. By the time I've trimmed this back and we've got the edge on, it's going to be about there. And there's not an awful lot of material here to be smashed and bent and so on, and as it's on his arm will move with it as well. So I'm happy that 18 gauge is the right fit for there, but you need to think about that depending on what you're going to be doing with the armour at the end. What I've done is I start to bend it a little bit. I take the edges over the hammer just so they're turned back a bit, rather than coming here and they're dead flat and you're in all sorts of trouble. I start to take it over, and then when it's a little bit more open than it is now, I'd take a hammer through the inside just to give it a tiny bit of a movement. What I mean by that is if you lay a flat ruler on there, there's a bit of a rocking motion to that ruler, so it's not perfectly straight. I don't like that on armour, it looks horrible. There's a little bit of a curve going like that on the piece. And now what I've started to do is just get to the point where I'm starting to marry it up to that lane. And we're just about there realistically. They're not too hard to fit, these, there's not that much mystery to them. So what we're going to do is take our lame off. We'll start to work with them like this, it's easier than messing about with that. You see I've made a small cut there, that was vaguely where I want the cut to go on the rear brace, and we're just about there, to be fair. A little bit of marrying up to be done just in that lower edge there. You can see we're there. Before I continue, I want to make a small cut on this lane. So to help with the movement of the rear brace, what I'm going to do is shave a little bit off of the middle portion here of the lane that's supporting it. That will enable it to, if I use this pencil, when you're in the straight position, it enables it to go just a little bit beyond that. Not quite as preposterous as that, I'm just showing on here, but rather than sort of be stuck fast to the lane, it gives a little bit of flex back, which it's unlikely your arm's going to do that, but with the padding on and so on, it just helps it feel a little bit freer. So what I do is, there's vaguely the middle of the lane. Make a mark, it's not going to be any further than that, and just bring your line through it, and there. So I'm just going to shave that off the middle. You can see at the top there it's not altered either side, it's literally just going to be through there. So I'll put that on the sander and we'll get that back. So we've just taken that edge off and back down there. You can see there's our original line at the top, going through it there, our original line there again. What that'll help is when the rear brace is on there, rather than just stopping against the lane there, it will be able to travel just a touch past it, making the whole thing feel a lot more fluid. So what I'm going to do now is start marrying up the holes. This will be the edge I'll work to here, and then we'll figure this out and cut out this scallop. So when you mark your articulations, or you're working out your articulations, first thing to consider is where to make the first hole. It's quite a panic sometimes, but basically this will have a hole in it, this will have a sliding rivet mechanism in it, whatever you want to call it, a sliding hole there. This hole won't be moving, this one will. This one's seen and you want it to be in the right place so it looks nice. This one, it doesn't matter so much. So what that means is you're going to make the first mark on your lane. Now this is the lane which will be seen at the back here, so I want to continue this line along so that it all looks quite nice. So get the mechanism, just check it's there, yeah, so there it is in its closed position. I want about that distance again, keep the aesthetic the same, and about there is where I will make the first mark. And then from that everything else will come, but because it's the one that can be seen, I know now that it's in the right place. If I put it on here and then there was a bit of a change, you can even sometimes end up past it with your hole over here somewhere, back there, or just down in the lane. This way you're guaranteed the one that you want to look nice will in fact be in the right place. So I'm going to work out now, I've punched my hole, drilled my hole, where I want the first one to go in here. At the moment there's just a basic curve on there, you shouldn't need much more than that. And in fact, looking at the lanes inside this on the original, there's none of this work here, they're all flat. So we'll stick with that for the time being, hopefully will work. And what I find with the rear brace is make the rear brace in an extended position, not preposterously so, but find where it wants to sit, which is about there, and then just bring it back from there a bit. We can move all of this material around and make things nice and snug and so on in a minute, but I want it in that extended position so it's just a bit beyond where it needs to be. So I'll make my mark, drill that out, and then we'll go from there. So here's our two holes at the minute, with nothing on the other side, just our two holes there. So I'm going to marry those up. Drop a nut and bolt through, And there we are. And what we're going to do now, similarly, make sure it's not in that closed position there, it's in a slightly extended position. Check that this all reaches. Now this one will in turn be stuck away behind the cooter wing, so you don't need to panic too much about the aesthetic, but it's a nice mark of professionalism to get it right. So we can see there's our line, there's our mark, get it about there. We'll get that hole drilled and we'll marry it up and we'll start to see if we've got an operating rear brace. A point about lames that I covered before in one of the previous parts of this while we were getting things ready. It's important that that distance at the top of the lame, if your lame is straight or square, is more or less the same. Any deviation in there, and what you're going to start to do is end up with a lame, rather than being straight, it'll be skewed, and then when it starts to move, the lame will move, the body of the arm will move outwards on an angle. So I've got a bit of bar here that will hopefully help. There we go. And you can see when you look straight down at the lame, there's our midpoint more or less there, it's pretty much at 90 degrees. A couple of degrees out doesn't really affect things too much because you've got sliding rivets in there anyway that will move things around. But if that was like that, there was material up there, ooh, try and get to the camera, everything's back to front, or if it was down here, then you're in real trouble as you start to move the arm and you'll start to hack the lame about. You don't need set squares and T-squares and things, you just need to judge it by eye. There's our midpoint going up, and that is more or less 90 degrees here, which is what you need. So we'll make our mark on the rear brace, stick them together where we can first. Get it nice and snug, and equally don't stick this hole halfway up the rear brace there. As you can see, what a disaster that will be. The whole thing will be moving around really strangely. So get it square down where it was, take it just up and beyond it, and then make your mark. A few mil down there, there's our mark there, and again a few mil to where it needs to be, so we're good and square still. Get that drilled, get the sides married up, and see if we've got a working rear brace. So here then is our rear brace that we've just done. I've not checked it yet beyond a quick movement, just to see if the armour gods are with us. Warts and all on this presentation, and we can see that it doesn't come past the end of the rear brace there, and it locks up nicely. Now you'll see on some that they'll move more like a crease here. It will come down and back out, mimicking this movement here, back in and then back out. But on the one I can see so far on the Italian version there, doesn't seem any evidence of that. It's just nice and secure at that top part and nice and secure at the bottom part with a bit in there. What I will do is I'll apply a bit of pressure just down in here with a hammer in a minute over a curved piece, just to make sure that is nice and tight in there. You can see that part way through the movement, if I can catch that right in the light, there's a little gap there which I don't particularly like. There's no reason for it to be there, so we'll just touch that down with a hammer and see if that solves the problem for us. And then we'll get on to finishing the slides in here and then the edge. So there's our basic rear brace extended there, so we can see the lame and the movement. Still a little sticky in places, but we'll figure that out. That's no problem. It's just a little bit of filing, just getting things moving nicely on those slots. We've got to turn this one yet into a travelling rivet, or a bit of one. But you can see there it opens and shuts quite nicely, and the movement of the arm, if we can find something to go in there, is the arm, my ruler. There we go. You can see there's the movement of the rear brace, of the van brace will be. So quite a nice solid movement on there, certainly well into the range that it needs to be, and a little beyond hopefully by the time we've got these sliding rivets in there. So I'm going to tidy this little bit up down here so you can see what's going on. I just want to tidy this in here a bit nicer make it a little more fluid just there, so there's no sharp edges and burrs. And then we'll get to figure out the height that we want this to be, and then where we want our triangle to be at the top. So onto the edge that we're going to put on this. Now on the original it's got a nice brass or latten strip across there with a bit of engraving or etching pushed into it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a simple or quite a shallow triangular edge on this rather than just a fold. This is going to be the top piece of this armour, so we want it to look nice for the wearer. So we're going to just put a nice little triangle edge. Now the first thing I tend to do with any sort of edging is most steel, certainly in the UK you get, comes in this covered with this protective layer of whatever this stuff is, and what you do is just take the first layer off. It's very, very quick, simple pass with something like an 80 grit, 120 grit, anything like that, just to lift it off. It doesn't take much work at all, certainly no need to bite in deep into the material here. So lift that off and then start to think about how you mark up the insides here, which we'll do next. So first thing I'm going to do then to start this edge inside is obviously we want this material to go forwards. So I'm going to mark in the back here where I want it to be. Now, there's no hard and fast rule to this, just remember to jot this down somewhere so when you do the other one you make the same size. So I'm going to go for about a finger's width throughout. There we go, that's all I'm going to do. And I'll just make a mental note of that. It's about 15 mil, so that's 6/8 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch there, I think. So I'm just going to jot that down on the board here. There we are, 15 mil. So when I come to do the next one later, I'll do it about the same. Now, what's going to happen is as I push this down, it's going to pull it open. So I also want to make a note of that measurement from there to there. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can simply just measure it and take a note. It's 14.5 centimeters or about 5 3/4 inches. What I like to do a little bit more is just, again if I can find my chalk now, is just take a measurement like that. It just makes things a bit simpler. If they're hot later, rather than trying to get rulers onto the surface and so on, I can just offer it up even with tongs, put it on there and see if I'm within the ballpark of where I need to be, because this will get pulled open. Now you can do this hot or you can do it cold. Hot is certainly a bit simpler, so we'll move this one warm, I think. But you can do the same thing, it just takes a few more hammer blows and you have to go steady. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to weaken this material across here a bit. I just want to stretch it so that it moves a bit easier, because as I pull that down there, like I say, it's going to pull those in, and then as you get elsewhere it's going to pull it in all sorts of directions. So I just want to weaken this bit of material here. So the first thing I like to do then is just do a couple of passes, mostly through the middle here, because that's where most of the stretching is going to take place, with a hammer that I've shaped like this. You can see it was a flat-faced hammer like this one, and all I've done is change the face of the hammer so that it's a bit more curved. This one will flatten that, whereas this one won't. So what I'm going to do then is just open this up here. I don't want to go beyond the line I've marked really. I just want to stay in there and just give it a few hits just to weaken it up so that it moves nicely. Be sure to keep the piece flat. You don't want to lift it up and end up bending it back. If anything, take it the other way. And that's it there. Don't have to go mad, don't want to weaken this material at all really. When you take it over, that'll put some strength back into it. Got a little bit of a the odd little jump on the edge there, so I'll give that a quick pass just to make sure it's nice and smooth. Then we'll get the heat out and we'll move to the next part. What I've just done then as well, something I forgot to mention earlier, is obviously where I'm going to be using heat on this, the marker pen that I use there will burn away pretty quick, to be fair. So what I've done is I've just scratched the line into there with a scribe, just so I can see it and get a better gauge for where I am as I get moving it in a few moments. So it's warmed up a little bit. It's only 18 gauge, so it's not too bad. What we're going to do is just take this over to an even 90. First of all, just kick the edges over, nice even strokes. Don't hit twice in one spot, you'll put a flat bit in. Take it past itself, walk it back. Remember, if you jump about on the inside here, it doesn't matter too much because you're going to be covering it. As long as you're not over here somewhere in the middle of the material, just keep it back and keep it on there. It's cooled off a bit now. It's this middle bit a bit harder, but not too much. Like I say, it's only 18 gauge mild, so you could be doing this cold. And to be fair, it's just cold in the workshop, so I thought I'd warm things up a bit. If you do drift into the material, I have done just there, just find where it needs to be. Walk it back across. So I'll give a little bit more heat on that, and then we'll get on to moving it around again a bit more. Key to it all is just take your time. Move it across. You see, when you get to these ends, it pulls the middle up again. So just kick that over. You can see it's splaying right open there. If we compare this in a minute to our measurement over there, we had 14.5 centimetres. That's opened right out now to 18, but that's no big deal. I'm going to cool the bottom down, give it another heat, and we'll get it back together. So back again, we'll just get this pushed down, use a flatter hammer now. I get this nice and crisp. We're taking it to 90 at the minute. Stay on top of that corner. In the middle here, just make sure if that starts to come up, just give it a tap, back down. There we go, so we're at 90, now we want to bring it just past 90. Get a smaller hammer. I could continue to use this hammer, the flat one here that I've got, but I much prefer using this slightly smaller one. So I'm going to bring that now back towards me over the bick. So it's still a bit warm. Get it couched into the hip and just gently bring it back. Put up with the heat from this as long as you can, because it means everything's nice and warm. Now if I lift that off there and I start hitting here, I'm going to bend the whole piece. So make sure that the parent of the material is on. Put it down, down. Even passes, you want to keep that edge as straight as you can. Getting very warm. getting away from me a bit here. What I mean from that is, on this end here, it's not very crisp here, it's more of a fold. I want to put that crispness back in, so before I take that down, I'm going to drop it in. There we go, get that crispness into that corner. And carry on just bringing it over. Just evening it off, try and get the wrinkles out. I'll come back to haunt you if not. Now there are multiple ways to make these. This is the way I was taught, with a few little adaptations just to suit myself. But there are different ways. You can get tools that go in there and you just bring them over the tool. Some people put the first turn in first, whatever. It's just a way, and I think that's important to say. Just use whatever works for you. Just use whatever works for you and the way that you work. So what I'm going to do now is, where I've taken it across, it's a little bit thinner here than it is at the ends, which means when we roll that over we'll end up with a sort of larger piece here thinning to larger. I don't think I've ever seen that. It tends to be thin, thick, thin, or even all the way across. So I'm just going to offer this up on the bench grinder there and just take those edges back so it's a bit nicer when we're finished, and then we'll start the actual turning of the piece. So, happy now. I'm just going to start to bring this over a bit more into the hip. Gentle tap. You see, I don't need to go mad. At the moment I'm working this cold, just to show you can. Take it over. I'm going to tidy this one up a bit more. There. So to about that angle you can see down here where we need to be. And what we're going to do, we're going to break that piece of material there. Catch that in the light. That small piece that lip we've just put in, I'm going to kick it over. You can do it hot, you can do it cold. I'll probably do a bit of both just to show that you can. Certainly if you're using high carbon steels, get in there with a bit of heat. But a little bit of mild like this, you should. Careful even passes. We're going to turn that edge over. Be careful that you don't put any divots in here, dinks and dents. Oh, you see them all over original pieces, but you know, try and avoid them. Just because you can see them, I mean, you should try not to make them. Keep that around, walking that over. So we're slowly turning that edge over. What I'll do is I'll try and stick the camera over my shoulder and we'll get a look straight down at what we're doing. Hopefully make it a bit clearer as well. Hopefully I won't go sticking my shoulder in the way. We're just about there now to start bringing that back. We've turned that over nicely. It's not quite broken there. You can see it's almost just like a roll, so we need to push him back a bit and do it. There we go. Just start to break him down now. Bring it over. Nice and tight. That's it coming. Working it around. You can see what I've done is I've lifted it up, I'm turning it over. At the moment it looks a bit like a capital P more than it does a triangle. It's not really turned over on this corner, so I might apply some heat on there. We'll just lift that out in a minute with a screwdriver, something along those lines. It's not turned really, so I'm thinking about the filming. I'm not concentrating, I guess, I don't know. Or I've just made a mistake. One of the two, but we'll see if we can get him over. If not, I'll just lift him out. There we go, it's going. So just walking it round along this top edge now. Try not to mark the material, it will happen, but it's coming in on that broken edge now. Come down a bit more from straight down if it's not quite turned yet. There we go. Where I'm hitting it now is more along this edge. It's more along this edge where the light is, so that I'm compressing that top down and it's starting to form one side of my triangle. When I'm happy that's smooth enough, a couple of dinks, lift them out, break that edge in. You can see there I'm forming that line. You can see it's definitely curved and it hits the flat part. That's what we want it to do. I don't know, so we've got quite a gap yet between the parent material and the edge. Down that way, there you go. So I'll do now is get it over and start working the back edge of this triangle. Brace it into the hip and away we go. You see how we're breaking that top edge and you're starting to see the triangle forming. So I'll walk this round a couple more passes and then we'll come back and see where we're at. So what I've done is a couple more passes, started to tie it down now to the plate here. I'm just tidying things up, trying to make sure my line's relatively straight. I don't want it going crisscrossing its way down the work. So I'm just working my way along, re-establishing or reaffirming rather this ridge here that you can see starting to form. And again on the top. And you just keep on reaffirming this line, showing it where it's meant to be. So you're satisfied it's more or less there, and just walk it down so it touches this. Then when you're to within about a mil of being in touch with it, remember we're going to put this back round, so that will pull that down nice and tightly onto the piece of material. Then you give it a file and a polish. And you should be just about done. So I'll do those bits there, I'll give that a few more touches on here. Get a bit crisper on the top. Then we'll give it a file and a polish, and we'll see exactly where we're at. So what I've done is I've just continued planishing that down with the hammer. You can work it down rough and then leave it rough, to be fair. There's an awful lot of armour like that. I suggest looking at somebody like Fred Reel of Real Armouries, R-Y-A-L-L Armouries. He does polish bits and pieces, but he is a master of just leaving stuff rough from the hammer. Whereas what I've done here is polished that up and tidied it up a bit. There's a little dink just inside there. Might pick it up in the light. But that's okay, that's okay. Like I say, you look at the originals and some of them are awful, some of them are exquisite, certainly better than this, worse than this, and I'd rate this sort of in the middle of them somewhere, so certainly good enough for the work that it's going to be doing. Fairly straightforward, I think you'll agree, to put a triangular edge on something. And you can just keep going, but be careful when you do file this down. Either use hand files, like I do, just to start them off, or if you're going on a buffing wheel and you're doing electronically like I've done on the finish here, just be careful. Remember, this is only 18 gauge and we've already turned and abused it quite a bit, so it could look nice but it could be paper thin, so you have to be careful for that sort of thing as well. So fairly straightforward to get those on. We'll get this attached to the arm, we'll see what it looks like, and then we'll take a quick look at the tools, and we're done on this piece. So there's the rear brace open, attached to the piece, nicely done. Closes up beautifully, goes beyond the range of motion backwards there, opens out again. So I'm happy with that. A little bit of tweaking, a little bit of loosening and so on of these things. Get them moving, there we go, moving properly, get that lateral motion I was talking about, which we can see now, and generally a nice movement to the piece. And we can see how we also put on that triangular edge. Still a long way from finished yet, got to tidy up the shape of it, add bits of leather and so on. Certainly do the van braces, we'll do that in the next one. But well on the way now to being a final piece. So a quick look through the tools that I used beyond actually cutting the metal for the rear brace and all those sorts of bits and pieces. A look at the mobile tools, ones you can do without and do with. So to cut the slots for the sliding rivets, I had a cutter and a drill. You need one or the other really. I prefer the drill. This was just on the bench. I'm in a bit of a rush because my daughter wants to go and see the Christmas lights get turned on. So that'll do for now. See the standard Sharpie, can't do without those. I used a couple of files. one of which I've lost at the moment, but I used a couple of round files just to cut the slots. The small one here just makes it a bit simpler, but you could do away with that one and keep that. You don't even need that, you could just chisel it out, but it certainly makes the movement move nicer if you do. The cutters again, standard cutters just for doing bits and pieces. Now to the actual triangle itself, and turning the edge there, I use the small hammer to get it started. Don't need that, I just find it's a bit simpler, but we can certainly do without him. But you do need, I would argue, a flat face hammer of some description, about that size or down. And also this rounded hammer that I've made. Again, you could do without it. I would argue it would make your job a lot harder, but it can be done. You could theoretically swap both of those hammers perhaps, and bring back the small one and just use him. The soft faced hammer there I use at the end. When you're marrying that edge down, you just pass it across the top on either side of the triangle just to marry it down onto the material. Again, you could use that and go gently. I used one of these just to start tidying it up. Not this one, this is an 80 grit. I used a 150 grit just to get that nice and tidy. And again, nuts and bolts just to hold it all together when you're going. So those sort of realistically are the tools you need to do this job. It's fairly straightforward. It takes a bit of practice to get used to breaking the triangular edge, but once you do, it's pretty much plain sailing from there on in. So thanks for watching. I'm going to go with my daughter now and wife to go and see the lights get turned on in our hometown, and I hope that's useful to you. Any questions, any queries, drop them down below and I will do my best to answer them over Christmas. Thank you very much.